He thought he could erase her with 3 words. Under the chandelier's honeyed light, the Sterling ballroom holds its breath the way water holds a reflection. Perfect, trembling, entirely dependent on the motion above it. Women in silk lean like constellations around circular tables. Men with practiced laughter raise crystal toasts. The band plays an old jazz standard, soft, familiar, so that everyone can feel the place as if it has always belonged to them. Immani Sterling sits at a corner table, a single silver bracelet catching and returning the light every time she turns her wrist. The bracelet is thin and simple, the kind of thing that marks a promise not so much to others as to herself. Her hand rests on a worn leather journal, edges softened from decades of being opened and closed, pages mapped like a life. Around her, voices bubble. She hears them as if through water. Congratulations, 10 years, toasts to visionaries, to legacies. Terrence stands at the podium to speak. He is practiced in these ascents. Charming, easy, a man who has learned what kinds of compliments look like generosity. Tonight his tux is impeccable. He talks about our club in a way that slides ownership from a past into a present that gleams with his pronoun. The room claps gladly. They have learned to hear him first. Then he glances at Immani and smiles a smile that says he has rehearsed this moment more than the rest. He raises his glass. And to the woman who is gracious enough to sit here among us tonight, though she no longer deserves the privileges of membership. His voice lands like a stone in still water. I revoke Immani Sterling's membership effective immediately. The chandelier seems to sway at the shock. Silverware clinks against crystal like tiny alarms. A ripple runs outward, murmurs, a breathy intake. Faces shift. Some look confused, some amused. Bianca Hayes, positioned deliberately near the front with a glass poised to sparkle, allows a small victory smile to bloom. Lorraine and Shanice let out the laugh they use when they mean to hurt. Immani does not stand. She does not shout. The journal under her hand is a pact. The bracelet taps a precise private beat against the leather, as if marking a metronome only she can hear. In the way a person trained to build does, she measures. Public performance, witnesses, governance. She notes the publicness like a cartographer noting a cliff. There is humiliation here, sharp, intended, but not the kind that erases. She knows that words can be loud and loose. Deeds are what remain. Terrence, she says quietly, and the hush leans toward her like a tide. Her voice is small in the room, but every microphone might as well be tuned to the cadence of its restraint. Membership is not a favor you can remove by whim. He laughs, easy. Forgive me for being practical, Immani. Rules apply. A revocation must follow the bylaws, she answers, and bylaws require notice, a hearing, and a vote of the board. You are not the bylaws. Bianca's smile narrows. Cute, but what are you going to do about it if you don't even have a membership card in your hand? There is a stifled cluck from Lorraine, as if she is tucking the moment into a box labeled Final Humiliation. Cameras in the press corner dart toward the exchange like moths. Members turn their chairs, forming a slow, amused amphitheater around 2 people who have been married in public for a decade and divorced in private. Immani watches the crowd the way someone watching a theater watches the crowd, searching for the crowd's scorecard. She sees sympathy like currency, and scandal like a moth. She notes faces who have owed her favors long buried in social accounting. She notes others who will side with charismatic spectacle. When the band swells to soothe the room, Immani closes the journal and does something that many underestimate. She counts. Not plates, not names, not votes. She counts the years. 10. 10 years of ledgers written in the margins, of midnight negotiations, of a phone number called before dawn to save a donor. 10 years of her handwriting in places no one thought to look. The margin of the founding minutes, the note of a land covenant, the draft of a trust. Deniers of signatures that put her at the beginning of everything this room pretends to celebrate. If you want to see the rest of this story unfold, stay with us, she could have said to the crowd, or to whoever would listen. But she keeps that invitation within her, a quiet beckoning only a few will accept. A murmur of sympathy and confusion passes through the attendees. Someone murmurs, "Is that even legal?" And someone else says, "Terrence has always been the face of the club." Cameras flash. Terrence drinks as if he has swallowed victory. His expression tells a story he has practiced. A man who can discipline what he believes he owns. In the hallway, after he steps down amid polite applause and the musicians' polite retreat, he finds Bianca and wraps a possessive hand at the small of her back, as one might anchor a flag. "You did well," he says. His voice is smug in private, softer, entitled. "Good," Bianca replies. He needed to be reminded who runs this place. Outside the hall, in a powder room that smells of soap and roses, Immani stands before a mirror. The chandelier's light follows her everywhere. It does not soften. She touches the bracelet at her wrist. Her mother gave it to her in a kitchen where dreams were not called ambitions but responsibilities. The leather journal is the weight she allows herself. There is a small scab of hurt on her lip from the earlier laughter, but her face is calm, composed in the way of someone who will not allow her narrative to be reshaped by spectacle. Flashback. The house where she grew up was small and full of voices. Her mother would iron shirts while humming something soft, a song that would later seep into Immani's bones, the same melody now tucked into the satin of the club's bandstand. Her mother handed her the leather journal on a rainy afternoon when Immani was 17. "Write it down," she said. "When they forget who did the work, you'll have it in your hand." Her mother's hands were strong. They knew how to sign loans, how to coax a ledger to life. The journal smelled like milky tea, and the pages were meant to hold a life, not to be admired and shelved. Back in the present, Immani opens to a page where, in small, precise handwriting, she had written the history of how Sterling came to be. The land purchase executed when she was 30, the draft of the founding trust, the names of the original benefactors scrawled in the margins with little notes about the conditions they insisted upon. The leather is familiar with her thumb. The pages are a map to a truth that the ballroom cannot swallow. She thinks of the nights in the club's early days, when the clubhouse was only a promise and steel beams were still being argued over. She remembers the smell of sawdust and the way courage looks in people's hands. Rough, calloused, persistent. She remembers the meetings in a church basement where donors had less gold than they had conviction, and the first ledger, paper thin and crooked, where she had once traced the correct spelling of Sterling with a pen that was the only expensive thing any of them had at the time. She remembers standing before a skeptical board, reading aloud sections of a deed written to a trust in her mother's name, and watching Terrence, then an earnest supporter, smile for the cameras as he told the story better than anyone else. It had not always been theft. For a time, Terrence had been a hand to hold the ladder while she climbed, but the hands that build often get overlooked for the hands that stand at the top and wave. Over the years, applause had favored the face in the tux. Terrence's voice had become the voice quoted in society pages. Her face remained the margin note until the margin grew thick with resentment. Another small flashback. The first founding meeting. Immani is younger, hair pulled back, speaking low to 3 men at a kitchen table while cinnamon coffee breathes steam, and a map of the land sits between them like a new country. One of the men folds the map and says, "You sure you want to do this? The club business is old men's work." Another laughs, implying the kind of suffrage social clubs often enjoy. Immani lays a hand on the map. "We build differently," she had said. "We will be a place people come to belong, to learn, to do good." They raise tentative toasts. The word trust is thrown around like a net to be woven later. Back at the gala, the band's music swells as if to push back the embarrassment. Immani walks between tables like someone moving through a gallery, eyes collecting details. A photograph of the course framed on the wall, a staff member who recognizes her smile and holds it like a secret, a young server whose gait bears the patience of someone learning to carry burdens gracefully. Her movement is not the sweep of entitlement. It is the quiet trajectory of someone whose life is stitched into the fabric of this place. She pauses near the portrait of the club's first president, a portrait that in years past hung directly across the room but had been shifted at some point to a less prominent place, as if the frame itself had preferred a quieter life. Immani touches the frame lightly. The paint is dry, The gilding is steady. Her hand trembles for only a breath. She knows how to go to lawyers, not because she enjoys the jargon, but because she understands that institutions answer to documents. She knows the difference between a rhetorical revocation meant for spectacle and a legal revocation that moves through registries and minutes and votes. She calls the woman she trusts most in the room, the chair of the board, a man named Harrison Caldwell, who has the civic brownstone face of someone who keeps minutes as if they were prayers. Harrison finds her in the back hallway. He is flustered in a way that says he feels the ground losing shape beneath his shoes. "Immani, what did Terrence?" he begins. "He made a show," she answers. There is no acid in her words, only cold fact. A revocation announced without process. "Bylaws," Harrison murmurs. He looks tiredly at his hands. He can't do that. He can threaten, he can stage a speech, but the board must be convened, she finishes for him. A vote, notice, the trust document, they're intact for now. Harrison's voice is low. "We have minutes signed from the founding meeting that list you as a primary trustee. We have a copy of the original deed in the archives, and a trust instrument dated before your marriage. If someone was trying to claim the club as their own, they'd be wrong on paper." Immani nods. "Then we make the paper louder than the speech." "Immani," Harrison says, almost pleading now. "This theater will make a mess, people will take sides, there will be press. It's better to settle this quietly." She thinks of being quiet for 10 years. She thinks of the ledger and the way its pages might refuse to disappear. "Not tonight," she says, "not in this room." There is a young woman at the edge of the scene, Tara, who looks like a mentee, one of the junior staffers who has watched Immani move through the world and wanted to be trained in the particular art of steady resolve. Tara's face is an open page. She meets Immani's eyes and without words offers to help. Immani had not planned a spectacle. She had planned patiently for truth. For years she had left a quiet trail of documents with a lawyer she trusted, with Harrison, with a safe deposit box whose keys jangled in a place Terrence had never thought to look. She had put away the original membership ledger, the founding minutes, the deed to the land, the drafts of the trust, things that take legal breath and do not die in the face of a baritone. She had also kept a record of speeches, photographs of her at groundbreaking ceremonies, notes from the first donors who had laughed at Terrence's jokes and come to her because they believed the clubhouse would be something more than status. They thought it might be a place to teach and to give. A memory collage is itself, the first shovel in the ground, her mother pressing a hand to the dirt like a benediction. "Your father's name is on the deed of my heart," her mother would say when she wanted to tease. "But make sure the piece of paper is signed or men will forget." The line had been a joke then. It had become a manual later. Terrence, meanwhile, prowls the upper floor with the ease of someone who believes scandal is a kind of appetizer to clout. He whispers to donors, his hand warm on shoulders, his laugh soft. He polishes the narrative while shadows gather. Late-night messages from Bianca with brazen plans. Lorraine calling to ask if Immani will leave gracefully. Shanice tweeting something cutting later that night, as if the world were a stage and they were the audience. When the first reporter approaches Terrence for a comment, an eager young woman with a phone glowing bright in the wan light, he delivers the rehearsal. "A revocation is about standards. We can't have someone who acted against our code representing the club." It sounds plausible because it is practice made plausible. He adds a quip about leadership decisions that makes its way into a headline the next morning. Immani returns to the ballroom with a plan in her chest, the way one carries an umbrella in a rainless season, prepared for the storm she will summon. She does not storm to the podium. Instead, she goes to the small anteroom where the staff keeps the archive displays, photographs, the old clubhouse blueprint, the first printed programs. Tara follows, eyes wide and earnest. "You okay?" Tara asks, lowering her voice. "Yes," Immani says. She sets her journal on the table and slides a cab card from the pocket. It is small, a decade-old card that reads, "Immani Sterling, founder," in a handwritten scrawl. Tara smiles like someone who has been given a talisman. In the archive cabinet behind glass is a small framed photograph of Immani at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. She is younger, wearing work gloves, a smear of dirt at her brow, and staffers surround her, faces luminous. There is a tiny plaque that credits the founding vision to Immani Sterling, but it had been placed there in the early days, while history was still malleable, before pages were argued over, before spouses learned how to wield applause. Over the years, someone had misattributed the plaque's emphasis in interviews. Over the years, the narrative bent toward the public figure who spoke easiest. That this photograph existed in a place someone forgot to tidy is a kind of mercy. Harrison calls a board meeting for later in the evening. The invitation is formal, a necessity, and reads like a small detonator. Emergency convening. Agenda includes review of revocation claim, bylaw review. It names the documents to be presented. The line of the invitation is precise and polite, and contains within it a legal fulcrum. The club's governance is not the whim of one man. Immani sits with Tara in the staff lounge while the band plays on, and they make a list. The list is not scathing. It reads like a map. Exhibit A, the original deed to the land, executed under the Sterling Trust with Immani designated as primary trustee. Exhibit B, the founding minutes from the initial donors meeting, bearing Immani's handwriting and signatures from those donors. Exhibit C, the membership ledger showing her early membership and continuous participation. Exhibit D, a recorded statement taped 5 years earlier, when her mother was alive, in which her mother describes the founding of the club and praises Immani's leadership. The last is tender and nearly private, but she keeps it because it witnesses what only the two of them had time to say. Legal will corroborate with executive summary, Tara says, impressed despite herself. We can highlight the trust instrument and the deed. Good, Immani says. Keep the language factual and brief. No theatrics. The truth does better when it is simple. They contact their lawyer, Naomi Gutierrez, who has the kind of voice that makes people believe in statutes. Naomi answers on the third ring. I read the headlines, she says, straightforward. Don't let him drag this into tabloids. Can you come? Immani asks. Naomi arrives inside the hour, an efficient presence with a leather folder, and the reasonable assumption that legal truth needs little color. She accepts a cup of coffee and turns her attention immediately to the documents laid out. If the deed and trust are in order, she says, fingers tracing a margin, you own the land through the trust. Being a member is a privilege, yes, but the trust establishes your role in governance. A revocation announced from a podium does not override the trust instrument. But the board could vote you out? Tara asks, anxious and young. It's not impossible, Naomi says, but it's complicated. The trust imposes conditions, and those conditions can supersede internal politics. Besides, any vote removing a primary trustee in favor of an individual's whim would open the board to legal challenge for breach of fiduciary duty. It isn't just a membership status, it's a legal position. Immani listens while the legal contours take shape like a map made of cold steel. The law is not magic, but it is durable. It requires procedure. Theater lacks procedure. It loves spectacle. She allows herself a small private satisfaction. Terrence has created a spectacle. Spectacles are bright but slipperier than paper. The backup plan already exists in the folds of the club's quiet life. Years earlier, when she had been wise enough to anticipate joy and grievance in the same breath, she had placed true copies of the deed and trust with Naomi and in Harrison's safe. She'd had an archivist catalog the founding minutes and photographs as if she feared that someone someday would try to erase the work of a woman with tenacity. That catalogation now looks less like a quirk and more like a prophecy. Tonight, Naomi says blunt, you can go public with the documents. We can request a board meeting, present the evidence, and let the minutes reflect the truth. The public will see the papers. That will carry weight. It must be about the facts. You must avoid moralizing. Keep your tone measured. Measured is my language, Immani says, thinking of her mother's hands and the steady press of that old song. She thinks of the way dignity travels. It is not loud, but it is undeniable. Between the powder room and the archive, Immani has a moment alone with her hands. They are not without scars. A small nick that came from the first summer she spent arguing with contractors, a callus from when she taught a night class at the nearby community college, shaking hands she did not know would matter. Her hands are the record of labor. She touches the journal again, feeling the spine. Across the room, Terrence's speeches are already seasoning the night. A social media post goes up with a photograph of him at the podium, captioned Leadership. The headline curls like smoke. Lorraine posts a clipped aside on a private member's thread. Finally, someone is holding the club to account. Shanice reposts a merciless meme. A few older members, whose loyalties are older than gossip, look on with sympathy. Others tilt their heads toward the new narrative because it is sparkling and easier than remembering debt. This is the moment when old networks begin to reconfigure, when staff members glance at the ledger and then at their paychecks, when donors whisper into phones about reputation and risk. Power in a social institution is a market that adjusts according to perception, but legal documents are not reputation. They are anchored in registries that do not care for gossip. The ledger cares for dates and signatures. The deed cares for the stamp of a county clerk. The trust cares for the patience of a person who writes down what matters. There is another flashback, tighter and more intimate. The first trustee meeting after construction finished, and the club opened. Immani stood before a handful of people, the smell of paint still fresh in the air. She remembers the applause then, not the easy applause for a man with a television smile, but the slow, sincere kind that comes when people realize something stable has arrived. Her mother sat in the front row, hand in Immani's, wiping a cataract of small tears with the edge of a napkin. That day, someone offered Immani a ribbon and a speech that praised her vision. The men's names were read. Terrence read them aloud with the kind of cadence that makes headlines. He put a hand on her shoulder in a photograph later printed for an anniversary pamphlet. His hand on her shoulder became a picture that many would point to when they wanted to say she had always had support. Time has taught Immani that credit is not a neutral currency. It is a resource awarded and retracted by committees that prefer the easiest narrative. She had once been content to let the narrative favor a public smiling face, while she did the work that did not photograph well. She had paid the price for silence in taxes of a social nature she had learned to budget. 10 years of looking away had taught her the cost of invisibility. Now she is invisible no longer by choice. At the end of the hall, a security guard named Marcus, who has watched the club evolve from curbside volunteer to private gatekeeper, nods as Immani walks past. His eyes are steady. He has seen Terrence make his theatrics before. He has also opened the gate for the first charter donor who paid in pennies and conviction. Marcus understands loyalty differently, not as allegiance to a person but to a place. He says softly, "We have your back." "It isn't about back," Immani replies, grateful for the simplicity of his language. "It's about truth." She meets with the board in the library off the main floor, where books smell like varnish and time. The room is darker, wood-paneled, the kind of room that keeps minutes like prayers. Harrison presides with the gravity of someone who believes that the board's work is not gossip, but civic maintenance. The others shuffle in, some aligned, some neutral, some looking for the safe seat that avoids scandal. Naomi lays out the exhibits: deed, trust instrument, founding minutes, ledgers, photographs, a cassette of her mother's recorded recollections, and digital copies of earlier speeches. "These," Naomi says, placing the deeds like keys on a table, "establish that Immani Sterling is not merely a member. She holds the office of primary trustee through the Sterling Trust, which created the club and its governance. Any unilateral revocation announced from a stage is inconsistent with the documents." Terrence bursts into the library like he owns the hallways and wants the room to notice. He floats a smile and then, in front of the board, repeats the claim from the podium. "We cannot let impropriety go unchecked. I acted to preserve our standards." "No one doubts standards," Harrison replies, a thin line of defense. "But standards are enforced according to bylaw. The bylaws require notice and a vote. His voice does not wag. It is a steadier insistence. You need me to lead, Terrence says, now soft as if bargaining in a wine cellar. You need someone who can make quick decisions. You do not get to make policy with applause, Immani says. Policy is not applause-friendly. Someone in the room coughs, an old member who understands that etiquette in that space is frequently the preface to change. The board schedules a formal review for the end of the night, with provision to present documents to the members and indicate the proper procedure for any revocation claim. It is an action that places procedure above pomp. It is, by design, inconvenient for spectacle and suitable for process. Outside the library, the gala continues unaware of the slow pivoting inside. Hors d'oeuvres pass, and the band keeps the room from stilling entirely. Members chatter about cocktails and course design, while the more nervous dip their heads to follow the news feeds on their phones. The headlines are beginning to take shape. Terrence revokes wife's membership. Club in turmoil. It reads like a simple story because someone has reduced it to a line that fits the space a newsletter affords. Immani returns to her table. She sits with palms folded on her journal, like a person closing a book she has written. Her silence is not empty, but full of preparation. She allows herself a single smile when Tara squeezes her hand. She is still present, but moving with the calculation of one who has learned to marry patience to action. Later, when the board meets the members briefly in the ballroom under the pretense of clarifying processes, the crowd leans in like sheep to a shepherd's voice. Harrison stands and speaks carefully, with the ledger and deed as props without becoming theatrics. We request a formal hearing for any membership revocation. A vote follows notice. We remind everyone that the club is governed by the trust instrument set at our founding. The practical instruction shifts the air. The room's attention tilts from gossip to procedure, like a stage crew pulling a backdrop. The cameras are less hungry for indignation and more interested in documents. It is a pivot that begins to shift the story into a longer, sturdier arc than Terrence's oratory promised. Back in the corridor, Terrence pulls Bianca close, frustrated. He had expected applause, not due process. You see? He hisses. They are protecting her. Bianca, cool as a coin, touches the edge of the podium, as if to test the balance of everything she had helped to build. Then we change the rules, she suggests. Her voice is not cruel. It is practical. We gather enough voices on the board. We make this quick. Practical, Terrence repeats as if approving a plan. Do it. Immani has already thought of that, about the way rules can be bent, and how votes can be bought with favors, and how reputation can be a ledger you pay with time. That is why she has never been reckless with the ledger. She has always kept copies and witnesses in the slow, ritualistic act of filing. There is now an urgency to make the documents public in a way they cannot be bought or bent. She has another small and private strategy. On a shelf in her closet at home, there's a small box with a cassette tape labeled in her mother's careful hand, Immani, Truth. It contains her mother's voice describing the founding as if reading from a letter. It is intimate and human. Naomi suggests a public statement. Immani hesitates, then agrees that a short recorded piece in which she speaks her truth, calmly and simply, will be better than an angry speech. She records a 3-minute statement in which she states the facts, dates, names, trust language, and the motivation behind founding the club. She avoids accusation. She does not denounce Terrence. She places the focus on the club and on the trust that created it. That recorded statement will later be coupled with the scanned deed projected for everyone to see. There will be no accusation thrown like a stone. Instead, there will be evidence shown in light, signatures magnified, ink stamped visible. Facts do not ask your permission to be believed. They show themselves plainly. There are minor acts of human compassion amidst the strategizing. A server, who once had a scholarship sponsored by the club, tells Tara that Immani saved her life by believing in a program. A staff member confesses in a whisper that she always thought of Immani as the one who taught the juniors how to manage a budget, how to hold a donor call. The testimonies are small, patchwork evidence of a life of steady work. In the green room before the scheduled presentation to the members, Immani sits with Naomi, Harrison, Tara, and the stylist Mara, who has been quietly altering hems and smoothing lines all night to give Immani the look of steady authority. Mara adjusts the cuff of her sleeve. "Not too much jewelry," she says. "Let the bracelet do the talking." "It has done a lot of talking," Immani says, folding her hands over her leather journal like someone tucking a letter in a pocket before leaving the house. "It's a symbol," Mara says. "People notice details. You will be calm. They'll believe you because you are calm." Mara's hands are professional, certain. Her work is small and meaningful in a small public way. Presentation is not vanity but a tool of persuasion. Outside, in the ballroom, murmurs are now interspersed with the mechanical click of cameras. Members jostle to get close to the small screens that live-stream the event. Terrence is in the center of a group, leaning forward, radiating the confidence of someone used to controlling narratives. He does not yet know that the night will not fit his script. Immani rises when Harrison calls her name. She does not walk like someone walking to a battlefield. She walks like someone who has come to read a book she wrote years ago, and now must recite a single chapter for anyone who will listen. The lights dim. The band stop playing. A hush like a held breath settles across the room. She crosses to the podium with the journal under her arm, the bracelet catching and releasing light like a measured pulse. She places the journal on the lectern, not to brandish it but to anchor herself, and looks into the audience, meeting faces with the simple honesty of someone who will tell the truth as if reading a ledger aloud. At the back of the room, cameras click and lights flare. Someone cues a projector. A dark screen waits like a blank page. At that moment, the room tilts. The collective expectation becomes a tidal force. Will she retaliate? Will she crumble? Will she play along with the humiliation? Immani breathes and thinks of her mother. She thinks of the leather journal, and of the small box with cassette tapes, and of Harrison's slow nod when he reviewed the trust. She thinks of the scuffs on her hands and the steady work of 10 years. She thinks of Tara's face, open and hopeful behind her. She thinks of Marcus, who keeps the gate, and of the server who once had a scholarship. The ledger and the deed could not be more factual. Tonight, the truth has an audience. She straightens, places one hand on the journal, and reaches with the other to the small remote beside the lectern. The projector hums. A single scanned image appears on the screen. An official county stamp, an inked signature, the precise script of a deed. For a long second, nothing else shows. The stamp is enough. And then, as the projector brightens, the room catches like a held animal sensing the moment before a release. The photograph on the screen is not flattering. It is neither triumphant nor petty. It is a shred of history magnified to clarity. A page from a deed. The name Immani Sterling, the date. The band plays a softer refrain. Terrence's smile falters just a degree. Bianca leans forward, a small animal that does not yet perceive its trap. Immani notices everything. The intake of breath, the shifting chairs, the way a chandelier looks like a constellation suddenly rearranged. She presses the remote again, and another image appears. The founding minutes with her hand in the margin, the signatures of donors who had once put ink to paper because they believed in her. At this, members lean in as readers do when a book offers the answer that settles an argument. The conversation tilts. The spectacle that had been organized against her is suddenly interrupted by a more relentless thing. Documentary proof. She is not shouting. She is not theatrically triumphant. She is presenting the ledger as a record, and in the logic of this place, records have a blunt and abiding power. The projector shows a short video clip next. Fuzzy with age, the soundtrack low. It is a home video of the ribbon-cutting ceremony. People clap in the blur. A young Immani wipes a hand on her pant leg, a smear of grease at her wrist. Her mother, present and alive in the footage, laughs with the kind of small private joy that comes from seeing a child fulfill a dream. The audio catches only fragments. "My Immani, do it." A hush grows thick the way winter grows cold. Faces in the room have shifted from curiosity to reckoning. Somewhere, a fork clinks. Cameras move like tides toward the light. Immani watches Terrence's face. He is still the man who thought public performance could reorder truth. For a moment, he looks like someone who has watched his own reflection slip out from the mirror. She has not yet spoken. The projector has done what truth often does. It shows more than accusation. It asks the world to remember facts. She reaches for her journal and for something else. She reaches for her journal and for something else, the small cassette box she keeps like a religious relic. Her thumb finds the tape's worn edge, the label her mother had written in a careful script, Immani, Truth. And for a second the world narrows to the small human weight of recorded voice. She sets the journal beside the podium and eases the cassette into a portable player a technician holds like an offering. No one in the room knows the voice they are about to hear will change everything. The projector clicks and brightens again. The deed, the trust instrument, the founding minutes flicker in sequence like incantations. The county stamp is legible enough to pin to a headline. The camera lenses glisten back. Terrence stands rigid as if someone has reached for the collar of the story he intended to wear. Bianca's smile has gone thin. Immani lets the tape run. Her mother's voice is soft, unmistakable. No civic cadence, no lawyerly precision. Only the steadiness of a woman who had watched a scratch of land become a place where people practiced belonging. For the listeners, it is intimate. For the board and the press, it is corroboration couched in tenderness. We put the land into the Sterling Trust because we wanted this to survive whims, her mother's voice says. It is Immani's work. She kept the books. She signed the letters. She held our promise. The audio is short, less than a minute, but its effect is to humanize a ledger. The projection holds a close-up of a signature a generation old. You can almost see the ring on a finger pressed down on the paper. The room's air rearranges to admit a different fact. The club was neither invented nor merely nurtured by Terrence. It grew under Immani's hands, anchored by instruments that exist outside applause. She steps up to the mic, her voice steady as a metronome. She does not accuse, she names dates. She points to instruments. Each sentence is an act of translation, converting private labor into public record. When we bought the property in 2012, she says, it was in my mother's name through the Sterling Trust. The deed and the trust instrument were filed at the county clerk's office. The founding minutes were signed by donors who insisted on a governance structure that protected the club's purpose from personal whim. Those records are on display tonight. They are factual. There is no flourish. There is no need. Facts shown plainly are difficult to argue with. Terrence hears the syllables of his own undoing. After she reads the names and dates, a brief hush, less reverent than stunned, spreads. Then Naomi, practically by timetable, stands and addresses the board in legal shorthand. Notice, hearing, provision for expedited review given the public statements made. Harrison, binding his hands like someone setting an appointment with destiny, invokes the bylaws. The room, which had assembled to attend a party, now attends to a set of procedures. For an institution built on ritual, that is a better altar than any stage. Harrison calls for a vote to suspend any unilateral revocations and to convene a formal hearing based on the documents presented. The motion is procedural, surgical. Several members, caught between habit and the facts in light, vote in favor. Others remain silent. The University of Gossip finds its registrar in ink and stamped minutes. Terrence turns bright red in a public way that used to be worn as confidence. He opens his mouth to insist the room needs him, and looks like a man who has just realized the ladder he leans on is not nailed to anything. Naomi's presence transforms the energy from rhetorical fury to administrative inevitability. Privilege may be revoked, she says, but only according to motion recorded and properly noticed. A podium is not a court of governance. That pronouncement, alongside the deed and the tape, is the engine that shifts the night. The club's machinery, its trust, its ledger, its bylaws, responds to process. The spectacle that Terrence hoped would humiliate Immani is, in a single turn, reframed as the kind of misstep that invites formal review. The club's members prefer the steadiness of procedure to the chaos of headline theater. It is a small conservatism that proves decisive. Bianca staggers as if struck. For her, the room had been a stage. For Immani, the room is a map. The difference between a stage and a map is that stages burn quickly while maps last. Outside the ballroom, reporters phone their editors. Headlines recast themselves mid-air. Founding documents challenge public revocation. On social media, the first wave is sympathetic to spectacle. The second is hungry for scanned signatures. Think pieces begin to line up like skittles being set for the morning. Who built the club? Asks one blogger. The erasure of women's labor, another proclaims. The conversation widens from gossip into a debate about institutions and memory. For Terrence, the legal turn is a kind of erosion. He had counted on performance, on applause. He had not prepared for registries and signatures. His attempts to argue morality from a podium become quixotic as his network thins. A few donors, those whose names show up in the founding minutes, are quietly queried by the board. Several affirm on the record their recollection that Immani had been the engine. They do not want their names misused. A major benefactor, whose conditional contribution funds a scholarship, asks for assurances that the trust instruments will be honored. Unmoored by documents that contradict his version of history, Terrence finds himself negotiating in an arena he had preferred to ignore. Night dissolves into a long, small series of administrative moves. The board convenes a hearing room in the library and schedules the formal review for the week to come. In the meantime, Harrison asks the club security to enforce the suspension of any extraordinary privileges Terrence had exercised for decades: use of a private office, special card access to the members' wing, the courtesy of invitations to select events. Security, led by Marcus, follows orders with a reluctant kind of fidelity. The metal gates that had long opened for familiar faces now click on an instruction. Marcus, who understands place, watches Terrence's pass fail the scanner as if he had seen an old friend lose their keys and not know why the locks have teeth. Bianca's departure is more abrupt. The club's general manager, acting on counsel, reviews employment policies and discovers clear breaches in how Bianca had leveraged her position for private events and favors. It is not dramatic. It is precisely that dryness, the letter of policy, that ends her tenure. She is escorted to a back office where she collects her things like someone who has lost a map and must make a new route. Her exit is not public calumny so much as administrative correction, an HR conversation documented in triplicate. In the social world that had once amplified her, there is instead a practical unmaking, no scandal, only the slow unspooling of authority when it lacks legal support. Word of the board's motion and the suspension of privileges travels quickly through donors, staff, and members. A handful of members resign in protest, their departures couched in public statements about taking a stand for leadership. A small number of members who had preferred Terrence's stewardship are uncomfortable. Others, embarrassed, issue succinct apologies for having repeated a narrative without looking at the paper. The chorus of voices fractures into factions: performative loyalty, proceduralists, those who simply want the club to survive. Over the following days, Naomi leads the factual parade. Title searches at the county clerk's office confirm the trust's filings. The ledger is examined. Signatures match the ink samples the lawyer had secured. Harrison organizes a public presentation for members who demand more than a headline. The truth is shown not as indignation, but as documentation: pages, dates, stamps, and careful testimony. The board's process is deliberate so that the club's response is immune to the whiplash of rumor. Yet despite process, there is cost. Terrence's public persona is fraying. Invitations that once arrived as a matter of course slow to a trickle. The critics, who once called him a steely leader, now cite his rashness and misuse of privilege. Privilege that had been a performance is now a liability. Ads for related events remove his name. A sponsorship that had been attached to his social network is quietly deferred pending clarity. Reputation, once a reservoir he drew from, loses its liquidity. Lorraine and Shanice, who had paraded their scorn with social aplomb, find themselves navigating the discreet but painful shun of a social circuit that measures patience in invitations. Lorraine's charity board declines to extend an honorary title, under pressure from donors who prefer not to be associated with family drama. Shanice finds commenters on social media who remind her of the cost of public mockery. Their experiences are not violent. They are precisely the practical consequences of alignment with a misattributed story. Bianca, for her part, leaves with a thinness that could have been melodrama, but is instead practical. Her references dry. The events industry, wary of a disturbed reputation, favors steadiness in its vendors. She spends weeks sifting through options, learning the hard way how much a resume that relied on borrowed glow depends on the source of light. She considers moving to another city, starting fresh. But even the attempt to start over is a lesson in the small economies of social capital. The same networks she thought to climb on are sentinels of memory. Immani's victory is not about watching them fall. She has no appetite for the theater of humiliation. Her aim is not personal ruin, it is restitution. Still, there is an unavoidable human reckoning. The club has a period of instability to weather. Some service contracts are reviewed. Donors ask for reassurances. Members worry about the course's maintenance budget. But in time, the steadier hands, Harrison, Naomi, a committee of trustees, translate the shock into governance reform. Clearer bylaws about membership revocation, formalized processes for dealing with conflicts of interest, and a transparent archival practice that keeps founding documents accessible, not secreted. The press surrounds the story with all the speed of modern appetite. Interviews appear in local papers, in morning segments. Immani declines many requests at first, asking Naomi and Harrison to let process run its course. When she agrees to a single interview, she speaks plainly, with an economy that the cameras choose to believe because it lacks spin. "I did the work," she says. "We built something for a community. The point is not my vindication, it is the club's future." That measured statement recalibrates the public's perception. They like the idea of someone who refuses to gloat and chooses to repair. Think pieces tilt toward commentary about systemic invisibility, about women whose labor is made invisible by dramatic faces. Columnists cite the deed and the tape as a corrective. A minority of voices still snipe about dramatic divorces spilling into public institutions, but their notes sound thinner against the evidence. Amid the administrative and social shuffling, there are quieter storylines. Tara becomes a visible presence. Where she had been an earnest junior staffer, she now emerges as a liaison between the club's new governance committee and its staff. Under Immani's mentorship, she learns the language of trust instruments and the manners of governance. At a small press event, Tara speaks about how she saw a leader demonstrate calm under pressure, and how that steadiness gave her a model to emulate. Her rise is not sudden. It is steady, the kind of career nurtured by teachers rather than headlines. Marcus, the security guard, is promoted to head of security for his steady judgment. He keeps the keys, but more importantly, wins a seat on a committee that oversees member access and security policies. The club, which had relied on informal tradecraft for decades, now invests in institutional practices that honor the place rather than personalities. There is a legal wrangling, because stability rarely arrives without some procedural friction. Terrence consults lawyers of his own, and in a move that is legal and expected if unromantic, files a complaint alleging improper process and claiming damage to reputation. Naomi, prepared and meticulous, responds with documented minutes, affidavits, and the trust instrument. The suit is a business of lawyers and filings. It does not deliver quick drama. Instead, it delivers a pragmatic lesson. He can claim slander or breach of fiduciary duty, but documents filed at the county clerk's office do not vanish because a man demands they. Litigation stretches, claims blur, and resources, not virtue, become the limiting factor. Financially, Terrence feels pressure. He is not destitute. He is simply no longer the unassailable face of every invitation list. He finds donors who once supported group functions with his name, attached less enthusiastic about personal projects. The social ecosystem rearranges. His relationship with Lorraine and Shanice strains. Family dinners grow smaller. Publicly, he professes outrage. Privately, he navigates the practical consequences of reduced influence. Bianca attempts a restart by applying her skills to different contexts. Her ambition that once read bold now looks brittle. She is forced to reckon with the ethics of how she climbed. The story does not demand her ruin. It asks, instead, that she carry the consequences of choosing expedience over integrity. She moves away from the club's immediate orbit, takes a freelance role in event management for a non-profit, and finds in small, earnest work a different currency, one that pays slowly and, in time, teaches nuance. It is small admonition rather than spectacle, but it is a real consequence. The club enacts changes beyond personnel. The board creates a public registry of founding documents, accessible to members and with summaries made available to the public. They form a governance committee led by Harrison, and include Tara as a staff representative. They institute a scholarship fund in the name of Immani's mother, funded partially by the donors who once lent their names to the founding pages. It is a symbolic act. The trust that built the club now funds education and training for members of the community, who would never otherwise access such programs. Immani insists the scholarships be administered by a panel including community representatives and staff, not simply by elite donors. She wants the club to live up to its original promise, a place to teach and to give. The mentorship program begins as a small workshop in the clubhouse's library, a 12-week curriculum on nonprofit governance, fundraising basics, and the importance of archival practice. Immani teaches the first cohort herself, 20 people who are not all wealthy members but those who had been served by the club's programs. A former scholarship recipient now studying landscape architecture. The server who once had the scholarship. A local school teacher who runs after-school programs. They sit around the same table where the founding minutes had once been argued, and learn to read instruments, to understand how a deed anchors a place, and how institutions last beyond temporary applause. There are small tangible reforms that feel like moral architecture. A clause is added that prohibits immediate revocation of membership without notice, and a hearing. A registry is created for donor letters with a snapshot of the intent behind each gift, and an archival room is renovated to preserve artifacts, including the leather journal and the cassette tapes, under professional care rather than being hidden in closets. An archival plaque is placed near the photograph of the ribbon cutting acknowledging Immani as founder. It is phrased precisely, without flourish, truth in the formal register that avoids triumphalism. When the scholarship fund is announced at a community breakfast, donors gather with staff and some members who had been once unsure where they stood. Harrison offers a measured speech about the club's responsibility to the community. Immani speaks briefly, not about defeating a man but about creating structures that remember labor and protect purpose. The room, smaller than the ballroom, is warmer for the intimacy. The server, who had been a scholarship recipient years earlier, reads a short note about life-changing support. There are tears, practical applause, and, more importantly, commitments to sustain the work. Weeks later, in the slow rotation of ordinary days, Immani opens the club gates in the morning and walks the course alone, the dew still on the grass. The sun spreads across the fairways like a wash of absolution. She runs a hand along the silver bracelet that has become a quiet refrain in the narrative, an emblem not of wealth, but of continuity. Each link is a memory, her mother's hand giving the peace, her own hands asleep at the end of busy days, a symbol that has outlasted gossip. Terrence, reduced to private appeals, requests to meet with her. He approaches with the practiced charm of old seasons, then missteps into a cautious humility. He offers an apology that is earnest in its feeling, but reproachful in its timing, an attempt to salvage what remains. Immani listens the way someone listens in a courtroom waits for facts. She accepts the apology in the simplest possible way. She sets boundaries. He is welcome to participate in club events as a member like any other, subject to the bylaws, but the board will not relinquish the procedure that protects the club from personality. Their meeting is not a reconciliation in the romantic sense. It is a redefinition of relations, an adult transaction, apologies accepted, new rules established. Terrence leaves with the sense of a man who will need to learn humility from consequence rather than rhetoric. Bianca does not return. She chooses reinvention in a smaller city. When she sends a brief message of congratulations to the new scholarship committee, Immani replies with simple civil words. Both women understand that there is no appetite for spectacle in restoration, only room for quiet lives. Months pass. The lawsuit Terrence filed grinds on in the civil court, procedural and tedious. It will likely settle. The trust's paperwork is too explicit for quick overturn. The litigation consumes legal fees and public energy. It does not restore illusions. Life at the club steadies. New member orientations include a module on the club's history and its founding instruments. Students in the mentorship program take field visits to the county clerk's office to see how registries work. Immani teaches one afternoon on the importance of recording work, how a signature can be a shield against misattribution. The lesson is practical rather than moralistic. A profile piece appears in a regional magazine, longer and kinder than a headline. A photographer follows Immani through the club's lesser-known corners, the community garden, the coaching room where a junior golf clinic convenes, the modest office where staff meetings happen. The photographer catches her turning a page in the leather journal, the sunlight across the silver bracelet. The portrait is not glamorous, it is honest. Readers respond with letters and emails, memories of quiet leaders in their own lives, notes of thanks, even offers of modest donations to the scholarship. The club's membership committee, now with representation from staff and community, implements a policy requiring that future gifts be accompanied by a written intent and a recorded statement, ensuring that donors' purposes are not lost in translation. The archival room opens to members by appointment. Older articles of the club's early days are displayed each summer. The leather journal sits behind glass on a rotating display. On the plaque reads a simple sentence, Immani Sterling, founder. Documents on deposit at the Sterling Trust. It's a sentence as ordinary as a deed, and that ordinariness is its victory. In the less public places, Immani tends to small acts that feel like the work her mother taught her to do. She visits the community college where she once taught a night class and speaks to students about governance, about how institutions can be shaped by hands that do not always appear in photographs. She sponsors a summer program that brings local teenagers to the club to learn leadership, not in order to indoctrinate them into elite social rituals, but to give them vocabulary for agency, how to read minutes, how to address a board, how to write a letter to a donor. One of the students is a young woman named Lila, who had never imagined the club could belong to someone like her. Lila has a quick laugh and a careful eye. She studies the founding minutes as if they are scripture. Under Immani's guidance, she helps digitize the archive and learns how to catalog documents so they cannot be lost to gossip again. Lila later receives a scholarship and, years down the line, becomes a leader in the club's outreach program. Her small arc, scholarship recipient turned staffer turned trustee, becomes precisely the kind of afterlife Immani had wanted for the institution. A place that spins out new leaders rather than perpetuating old ones. The months lengthen into a year. The litigation winds down to an expected settlement that acknowledges the trust's language. The club's governance reforms are codified, and donors who had worried about chaos return, not in the blink of performance but in pragmatic measured increments. The clubhouse hums again. Staff move with an ease that suggests continuity rather than spectacle. Immani visits her mother's grave in the rain that follows the first anniversary of the gala. The leather journal lies on her lap as she walks the path to the stone. The silver bracelet warms against her wrist. She kneels and places the journal on the grass, closing the cover like one closes a long conversation. She leaves the cassette box on the grave for a moment, a private offering to the woman whose voice had proved decisive. Then she opens the journal and, with a pen that has become accustomed to careful script, writes a new entry. Notes about the scholarship, minutes from the mentorship committee, a short plan for an annual archival day when the club will invite the community to learn about its documents. Standing, she pulls out the small sapling she had bought months earlier and had kept in a pot at home, a young tree with thin, hopeful branches. She plants it there by the headstone as a gesture that is both intimate and public, a living thing that will take root, and one day stand as a modest monument to the mother who taught a daughter to sign her name and to protect what she built. "Thank you," she murmurs, not to any audience but to the ground and to the recorded voice that had traveled through speakers to convince a room of truth. She slips the bracelet over her hand and feels the faint press of metal against skin, an old lullaby of continuity. The wind moves the leaves, the sapling shivers at a new breath. Back at the club, spring arrives and the mentorship program hosts its first alumni event, where Lila speaks about finding a place in the world and being given, in a literal sense, the handrails to climb. Members listen. So do the neighbors and the scholarship recipients from town. There is a sense of a different inheritance being passed down, the inheritance of procedure, of archival honesty, of a culture that remembers labor. Immani walks the course one evening, the sun low, the clubhouse windows tinted with the amber of late day. She pauses by the practice green and watches players in a couple of groups, young and old, each finding their rhythm. She thinks of the band from the gala, the same song that had been playing at the start of everything, and for a second the world seems to fold into a single refrain. The silver bracelet catches the light as she reaches into the pocket of her coat and takes out her mother's cassette, sealed now and catalogued in the archive. She smiles, not loudly, but with the slow satisfaction of someone who has not sought spectacle but justice. In a small ceremony months after the dust settles, the club announces a formal renaming of a community room in her mother's honor. It is a quiet event. People who had once been skeptical attend, staff bring flowers, and Lila reads a short note from a local teacher about what the scholarship has meant. Immani, brief and elegantly composed, speaks about memory and the importance of making sure a place remembers the people who built it. "A built place is not architecture alone," she says. "It is an accumulation of small acts. We keep those acts safe when we record them." That is the victory she seeks, a place that honors the invisible labor that builds institutions. She does not demand that the world rewrite the record of every slight. She wants instead to build mechanisms so the stories of work are not left to the whimsy of a single face. Years later, when she walks the grounds with a new generation of trustees, she notices things that once would have gone unattended. The way a bench was repaired, the inscription on a donor plaque, the neat rows in the community garden overseen by a local teacher. She thinks of the leather journal again, of the tape in the archive, of the single signature magnified on a projector like evidence. The bracelet is always there, a rhythmic proof of continuity. On an ordinary afternoon, Immani receives a letter from a woman who had been on the other side of the original debates, one of the men from those rough first meetings. He writes with a small tremor of apology. He had been wrong to assume, he says, that the loudest voice represented the work. He offers his name to the scholarship fund and signs, handshaking, as if he had taken a long journey to find humility. Immani replies with a brief note that accepts the donation and the apology, and asks him to come speak to the mentorship program about partnered leadership. It is a small act of bridge building, not theater. She is not interested in gratitude as spectacle. She wants to convert regret into apprenticeship. The club, steady now, holds an annual archival day, a day where members and citizens can come to learn about deeds, trusts, the ledger, and how to protect community resources. Many attend, including a surprising number of young people who had never imagined an elite club could become a place for civic learning. The program is modestly funded by donors who prefer their names unlit, content to invest in a tradition that endures rather than a persona that gleams. When the episode that once dominated headlines is spoken of later, it is in a tone neither vengeful nor saintly. It is described as the moment a club learned to keep its paperwork tidy. There is a wryness in that phrasing, as if bureaucratic rigor were suddenly heroic. But to Immani it is simply the point of what she always believed. Care and record keep what memory tries to lose. On a quiet evening, when the members' lights have gone low and the course is a silhouette against the violet sky, Immani sits with one of the young trustees, a woman named Clara who had been a skeptical donor at first, and now champions the scholarship. Clara asks softly, "Do you ever regret not making him pay more publicly?" not making them suffer? Immani looks at the bracelet, then at the dark greens beyond the clubhouse. She imagines her mother humming as she irons shirts decades earlier. No, she says, ruining people is a kind of work I have no appetite for. Restoration is harder and kinder. They both laugh, not out of flippancy, but because a small private joke has become the language of endurance, work that is less about spectacle and more about repair. At the crest of the hill, the clubhouse lights throw a final glow. The leather journal rests back in the archive under glass, opened once a year to be read aloud to new members as part of their orientation. The cassette, digitized now, sits in a public folder with a little note about provenance. The silver bracelet rests on Immani's wrist as she turns homeward, the metal cool and faithful against her skin. In a quiet video made some years after the gala, simple, without much fanfare, Immani speaks about invisible labor, about the importance of documents, about how institutions remember. The clip is not a plea, it's a lesson. It circulates modestly, shared by people who had been touched by the story, by mentors and mentees, by those who recognize that making a place just requires a kind of patient, legal housekeeping. If this story has touched you, consider sharing it with someone who needs to hear about quiet leadership and the structures that keep memory honest. If you want more stories that honor work done with dignity rather than spectacle, follow along. On the path back to the gravesite, she pauses once more, presses the journal into the turf, lays a hand on the little sapling her mother will never see fully grown, and speaks a small, private vow. To keep recording, to teach others to keep, and to build institutions that do not depend on faces but on the work that sustains them. She walks back through the club doors where her name is finally printed in a way that matches the deeds. Precise, unornamented, enduring. The band plays that old jazz standard sometimes now, for small events and charity afternoons. It is a familiar thread. The bracelet glints. The journal lives behind glass. The trust holds. In the end, the narrative was never about being loud enough to be believed. It was about being careful enough to leave proof.